Welcome everybody to our Maverick Diversity Institute session for today. And today we have a great topic. It's diversity in the military and veteran community. And this is presented today by Mr. Tim Adams, who works as the Military and Veteran Student Success Coordinator here at Minnesota State University Mankato. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Tim.
All right. Thank you very much, Megan. I appreciate everybody who chosen to attend today, and I hope that we can make this an interesting, dynamic talk. And I request that everybody please hop in with questions or anything else. And this, I'd love it to be an interactive talk and to hear your opinions as well as mine. And I've been here for about 3.5 years, and it's a wonderful school, and I enjoy working with the military and veteran students here on campus. We currently have about 400 to 425 students who fit under that category. And there are about half of them are currently serving in the Minnesota National Guard or in the reserves. And another half are your students who have completed their military active duty time, usually a 4-year experience where they were in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and then have left active duty and come back to Mankato and are using what's called the GI Bill to get their school and training paid for, and then are going to go off and go into just normal aspects of life, just like any other student on campus. A question I get a lot is there something special that veteran students or military students need to have happen? And the answer is no. We are just regular students like everybody else. There may be some times where if you're a military student, they'll call you away on a weekend or have you go and do some duty on like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but they should be speaking to their friends and the faculty ahead of time and say, okay, this is coming up, and is there something that I can do to, if there's a test that I'm going to have to miss, can I take the test early? Can I take the test late? And just some normal accommodations. And 99% of the issues we've ever come up against have just been speaking with the faculty member, and the faculty member says, okay, yeah, we can go ahead and work something out. And the student just carries on with their regular duties as a student. Something else that I love to point out is the fact of if you serve 4 years in the military, you're labeled a veteran. And most people who have been in the military are not combat veterans. Most have not done things that would have them suffering from PTSD. For a lot of people, they join, they do their 4 years as a logistics person, or 4 years as human resources, or 4 years of maintenance, or 4 years of something. They do their time honorably. They are based in Texas or California or Washington State. They come back home and they lead the next 50 years as just good old Minnesotans. And out of the 80 years of the average person's life expectancy, your 4 years you serve in the military is something that we take pride in, but it's not the high point nor the low point of your life. I just look at it as kind of a chapter. My first chapter was a student. The next chapter is as a college student, a chapter in the military, a chapter as a young unmarried person. You get married, become a parent. There's just a progression that a lot of people go through, and being in the service is just one chapter. In a lot of cases, I hope it's an interesting chapter and a chapter that you learn quite a bit about yourself. And there are fewer people in the military than there have been in quite a few years. And there's about 1.3 people who are in the military and about another 1 million who are members of the National Guard or the reserves out of 320 million people. To put that into contrast, back in World War II, we had about 14 to 15 million people in uniform out of a society of about 120 million. And so about 0.3% of the people currently are military or veteran affiliated, whereas back in World War II, just 75 years ago, it was 1 in 10 was actively in the military, and everybody had a cousin, an uncle, a relative who served. And even today, most people you meet are going to say, my grandfather, my uncle, my somebody in their family has served. And part of looking at the diversity aspect of the military has always been, in my opinion, at the forefront of change. And if some big societal sweep is going to happen, typically it's the military who is caught up in exactly what is happening. And the military tries to, in essence, lead societal change, but a lot of times it's because of the presidential directive. For example, the integration of the military came underneath Harry Truman in 1948. So that was pretty closely after World War II. 1947 was Jackie Robinson integrating baseball. And then you can see that after World War II happened, the Tuskegee Airmen and a lot of the things that happened in the military led to society kind of reevaluating the place of minorities in society, and the military was a reflection of that. In the South, there was a lot of resistance to desegregating military units. How could I possibly serve with somebody whose skin color is different than me in a unit, in a tank, in an airplane? And then people, after they realized it, said, okay, this isn't that big of a deal. I can serve with people of different color, and we can still be effective as a unit and do our job as a serviceman. And it was reflected in society as well. There was a lot of changes that had to happen, but due to societal changes, now you look at the civil rights laws and you go, well, of course, Black people are equal to everyone else. There shouldn't be segregation due to skin color, the amount of fountains that say, okay, here's one for colored people, here's one for everybody else. The military was part of the lead on saying that, nope, everybody's going to get treated the same. And it took 20, 30, 40, in some cases 70 years before things are really getting better. But the military is now considered to be one of the places where, as a young person of color, you can join the military. You're going to be judged based on your character, not based on your skin color. And you see leadership who are people of color. And another current aspect that's going on is the integration of females into the military. And a good way to look at that is it was 2016 that they passed a law that said all jobs in the military are now open to men and women, regardless of their gender. That's 4 years ago. That's 5 years ago. That is not something that is a long time ago. And so in some ways, we are the first generation that will really be able to say, we were there when, we were not there when desegregation happened, but we were there when women were allowed into all jobs in the military, and the problems that are going to be brought about are played out in society as well as played out in the military. One good way to look at that is the draft. And for a lot of people, they don't think of it this way, but there is a draft that goes on today in society. As a man, when you turn 18 years old, you get a postcard that says you need to go down to the post office and register for the selective service. The selective service is the official name for the draft. From what I understand, women are not required to do it today, where they have to walk in and fill out the card that says, in case of national emergency, they're going to draft women as well as men. A very interesting topic to put out is, should women be required to sign up for the draft? And are you truly citizens of the United States if you're not allowed to and required to sign up for the draft? Let me check on the chat here. Does anyone have any comments as far as should women be mandated to sign up for the draft? And another way to look at it is, if women are forced to sign up for the draft, as a 19-year-old male, if you don't qualify for some other program, they can hand you a rifle, send you into infantry, and send you off into a combat job if the draft reoccurs. Should they be able to do the same thing for women? Because if women truly are going to be equal in society, half of that coin is responsibility, the other half is having rights. Should women be given a rifle and said, okay, you need to go in an infantry unit and go off and fight for your country? And then how will society view young women coming back in body bags covered by the American flag as opposed to young men. And in some ways, what I love about that concept is if people are reluctant to send people into combat, there is no one who is less reluctant to go into combat than veterans, because we realize the price that we pay in physical health as far as losing limbs and other issues. Also, it's mental health. There is a cost to be paid for what happens overseas in combat. Yep, and I just heard our first controversial take. Now that more options are open to women in the armed forces, they should be required to sign up for the draft. And that is a very strong position, but it would be fun to have a group of 20 women and say out of that, okay, young ladies, you would fight tooth and nail to say that yes, women are the equal of men, and they should have as many rights as men do, and they should have legal, physical, social equality with men. But one of the downsides of being a guy in today's society is they can send you off to a war, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And the concept of military with other, there are very few other countries that require women to join combat branches. They can make you do your 2 years of service. They'll make you go into intelligence or human resources or a non-combat type of role. But also of interest is the line between combat and non-combat is blurring. It used to be hundreds of years ago, you had a group of soldiers in a uniform that would march across a field to fight against another group of people in different uniforms, and they would have a clash, there'd be a battle, the next day there would be a victor declared, and then the war would be over. The current model that we're having is low-grade conflict with non-nation state actors. For example, Taliban, ISIS, different terrorist groups are non-state actors. The military is protecting the borders as far as the Coast Guard, and they have drug smugglers who are very, very well armed and very well equipped, who are in essence invading the United States, shooting people, putting us at danger. And one of the legitimate purposes of the military is protecting the borders. Is that considered a combat job to go off and fight against narco terrorists who are coming across the border? There's a lot of interesting things that happen. Okay. The purpose of the military is very simple. We are here to protect the United States, and that includes the people, the property, the things that the police and law enforcement protect us from internal threats, and the military protects us from external threats. And it's a very new thing, just basically after World War II, that we had a standing military that was very large. For example, the Civil War, we drafted a bunch of people and had a bunch of people volunteer. Once the war was over, they went home. And there was not a standing army. As a matter of fact, the Constitution, one of those amendments that nobody ever reads about, is the one against taking soldiers and housing them in civilians' houses. Because back in the day, there were so few military, there were no just regular military bases. If there was going to be an army, they had to be housed in private citizens' houses. After World War II, there was a huge change, and it affected the military dramatically because now we were going to have a large standing army and military to be a rival to the Soviet Union in what's called the Cold War. But now the Cold War is over, and a serious discussion that we have in the military is we spend a phenomenal amount of money every year on a standing military. Is that better spent for social programs? Is that better spent for building roads? Is that better spent for taking care of the elderly and taking care of the homeless and taking care of the sick? You cannot pay for a huge military that's worldwide and provide the best amount of, protection from society, augmenting to having schools and roads and everything else. And what is the proper mix of military spending with domestic spending? And that's one of the debates that societies should have. And in essence, we are paying for the people of Europe. because NATO pays a very small amount of its gross domestic product into its defense, and the United States, by treaty, is now obligated to defend around the world a lot of other societies. And we are a member of NATO, and there's a famous clause in the NATO charter that says an attack on one is an attack on all. And we are obligated to defend Turkey. If Turkey is attacked and invokes the NATO charter, then the United States will send its military off to go defend Turkey. Germany, the United Kingdom, other members of NATO. Also, we are obligated by treaty to defend Japan and South Korea. We currently have military forces on the ground who are stationed in South Korea. And if North Korea or China or something else happens, then we are going to be fighting tens of thousands, or not tens, but thousands of miles away from our shore based on treaties that we have signed. And I think it's up for discussion what should be the role of the US military. And as a member of society, then what role should society play in supporting those missions? And do the people of America still want us to have such an extensive military, and expensive as well as extensive? And what is the proper role of modern society in volunteering for the military and propelling that into the future? And that's one of the really interesting questions I have is, if the military does not reflect society, then people are not going to volunteer their time and a part of their life to join and support the military. And so a lot of ways, the military is forced to be a reflection on society and the views and the values of society. People will talk about how after they came home from Vietnam, there was a lot of anti-soldier animus, and that they were spit on in airports, and people were not happy with the role of the US military in Vietnam. And my answer to that is very simple. It wasn't the 19-year-old who was drafted or volunteered to go fight in Vietnam who deserves the extent of your criticism with US policy. It is Congress, it's the president, it's the leaders of our society who chose to send us into Vietnam. It was not the 19-year-old who said, gosh, I'd sure like to go fight in Vietnam in the jungles and come back with a missing limb and PTSD. It was Congress, the Senate, the president, and the leadership that sent us. And don't confuse a young man or woman who chooses to join the military with somebody who is making policy decisions. They are just going off to do what is decided in Washington, D.C. Some of the more interesting aspects of the military is supposed to look like society. And there are certain guidelines that you have to follow, as far as, if you are a type 1 diabetic, you can't serve in the military. If you have flat feet, you can't serve in the military. If you have scoliosis, you can't serve in the military. If you have some mental health challenges, you're not allowed to serve in the military. The reason for that is you need to be able to go off and kind of be an independent unit away from the modern medical establishment. And if you are not able to carry a weight and to do certain things to be deployed away from the United States, then your health is not compatible with military service. There's also just a fitness component. Okay, I love this concept that Destiny just came up with. I don't know if our military reflects our population anymore. More and more people are advocating for less military spending and reallocating those funds to other areas. That's not new. I'm a little bit older than you, Destiny. I'm assuming that has always been a discussion. That is not something that's not something that's brand new. During the Cold War, there was a huge discussion of, we are spending way too much money on nuclear bombs. We are spending way too much money on battleships. We are spending money on tanks and everything else. That money would be better spent for helping farm families. That money would be better spent building better schools. Take a look at today, the amount of subsidization that comes from state governments to state universities, such as Minnesota State, Michigan State, Ohio State, has been decreasing, and the cost of tuition has been going up to cover that deficit for your education. Are you guys really comfortable with us spending billions of dollars on the military and having to pay more in tuition costs for going to school? That's a direct contrast, that if we reduce the amount of the military, but there's also we need to have some form of military to perform certain roles in defending the country. And so a ongoing, and in my case, a very valuable debate is what level of military should we have and what level of spending for everything else. From Carl, I think the shared sacrifice of service would reduce the tribalism and division we are currently experiencing in this country. Amen. Plus, if the children of the powerful people are also obligated to serve, perhaps this country would use its military, enter into treaties, etc., more judiciously. It would make the military more representative of the country. And that is and thank you for your service, Carl, I appreciate it. That is a huge, huge issue of, it is very easy to send somebody else off to go fight. And part of the problem that we have with just a small portion of society represented in the military is, it used to be that you were very reluctant to send people off to fight because you were sending your friends and neighbors to go fight. Now, if we see it as a professionalized military who are in a lot of ways mercenaries, it's easy to send them to go fight because they knew what they were signing up for when they joined the military. And that's a bad reflection. The more that the military is detached from what it should be our Army, our Navy, our Air Force, not the US's Army, not the US's Navy. If you feel that people are detached from the military obligation that society should have, then that's a real problem. Another way to look at it is, in law enforcement, there's now a lot of discussion. What is the proper role of law enforcement? What rules should they follow as far as treating with civilians? What levels of force should they be able to use? That's a fantastic discussion that needs to happen on a continuing basis, because law enforcement, in essence, is all of us as a society saying, these are the rules that we all agree to live by. And if you break these rules of society, then this is what's going to happen, and this is what the police are there to enforce. However, if the people feel that law enforcement is not a part of society and not reflective of, I'm putting my hands down, I realize I'm poking at things. If law enforcement is not considered a part of society, then people aren't going to feel that we are enforcing ourselves and holding ourselves to certain standards. They're going to feel like those other people. And when you start to other people, specifically military or law enforcement or any other group in society, that leads to a dangerous dichotomy of, they don't belong to us, they are the other, and you can do things to others that you wouldn't do to my friends and family. And we need to make sure to keep the military is thought of as our military, and our law enforcement, our National Guard. Something that the National Guard is always very, very reluctant to do is, the governor of the state calls us out to suppress peaceful protests. But there has to be a line between what is the definition of a peaceful protest, what's the definition of a riot. And that line is very fluid depending on what side of certain issues you're on. But it's never a good thing to have destructive setting fire, stopping people on the highway. And right now we are going through some very interesting social changes. And that's not just an isolated thing here in Minnesota. That's a nationwide thing. And in my ways, the only way that society moves forward is to have these discussions, and they can't be, in my way, based on political lines that said this one political party advocates this and the other political party advocates that. It needs to be all of us as citizens of Mankato, all of us as citizens of Minnesota, all of us as citizens of the United States need to come to agreements on certain fundamentals of this is the proper role of law enforcement in today's society. This is the proper role of protest. And if a protest is judged by one group of people to be peaceful and constructive, and judged by another group to be destructive and has to be sent in and dissipated by force, then we have a fundamental lack of discussion going on in the country. Because what we need as Americans is to come to agreement with the future of law enforcement, the future of society, the future of race relations, the future of economic opportunity, the future of education potential. It's all a huge rolling ball of discussion that needs to happen in the US, much more so than, okay, this is my group, I'm going to stick with it, and it's my people, live or die. And what I like about discussions like this is we get to talk with people of, we have 14 participants, which means we have 14 different attitudes, opinions, life backgrounds, discussions on what I feel is important to me, because my first priority is going to be different than Holly's, is going to be different than Carl's, is going to be different than Pat's. And so we need to come to an understanding that all of us have different priorities, but I will respect Holly's choices. I will respect Carl's choices and Pat's choices. And everybody gets to have some benefit from society, but everybody also has skin in the game. You don't get to participate in American society, whether it's military, law enforcement, education, just being a good member and driving the speed limit. All the choices that we make as American people need to reflect the respect and dignity for everybody else who's here and respects their choices. And if you want to change the law, wonderful. There are tried and true methods for having a protest, petitioning the government for a redress of grievances. That's one of your constitutionally guaranteed rights. However, when does your right butt up against somebody else's right to privacy, somebody else's right to life, liberty, and property? And you don't get to burn down things that somebody else has worked for. And as a leader of a protest, you need to really sit down and say, okay, how is this going to influence other people? And what message am I trying to send with this protest? And how will I control the distribution of what happens? Because you don't want to have a legitimate protest you're having develop into something that's counterproductive, that makes people look at it and say, okay, that group is not reflective of America, and therefore I doubt its legitimacy. Okay, here, I need to take a break for a second. Okay, thank you. Okay. Here, let's take a look at a message from Pat. How has the attitude and support for the military changed over the last 10 years now that we are getting further removed from the 9/11 attacks? Tim, this is very true, and this is why it's a dangerous precedent when the National Guard are called in to supplement law enforcement activities, especially during civil unrest. I cannot agree with that enough, Pat. When you have the military and the National Guard, which are literally your students and fellow members of just walking around, I know people who were called in, given a face shield and body armor and told to go stand on Interstate 35W because there were protesters coming. They do not, we considered ourselves to be members of society, and to society we will return. And having people marching along, you don't know from one minute to the other, are they going to come back and embrace you as a brother and sister, or are they going to look at you as a tool of the state that is there to repress them? And in some ways, the National Guard is the ultimate expression of the citizen soldier. And we are members of society, and we may be protesting the next day when we're no longer in uniform, marching down those same streets. And so it's a difficult characterization of the National Guard as not being a part of society. And in my opinion, the National Guard is a member of society, and we need to solve our issues in a calm, peaceful way, rather than having conflict. And that's from both sides of because if you are given an illegal or unlawful order as a military member, you are obligated to not kill people. You're obligated to not unjustly do things in the course of your duties as a military member. The Nuremberg defense that the Nazis had was, I was given orders to kill people. I was given orders to break the rules of common decency. And they were found guilty in spite of being given legitimate orders from their leadership of doing horrible things. The same is true with the National Guard. If we are given orders that are to do things that are illegal or unlawful or immoral, we have a duty as a member of the military to not carry out those orders. And let me see. And the attitude and the change for military, to be honest, I feel that most people still give a great amount of support and deference to military members. I know that the military is always ranked very high in the public trust, whereas Congress always seems to rate very low on those public trust polls. And part of what the military needs to do is remember that we are given a special responsibility by society to protect and defend, not in a law enforcement issue, but in a societal issue. We are the thought leaders. We are the people who do the putting up sandbags and protecting people if they feel that a protest is about to become destructive. But if a peaceful protest happens, I'm happy to watch and participate in peaceful protests. And we just need to be careful to respect those who have different opinions than we do, and make sure that we're doing our best to influence others by the depth and the quality of our thoughts, rather than taking a stick upside their head and getting compliance that way. And something that's going to be very, very interesting is there were 4 officers who were arrested with the George Floyd murder, to see how that plays out in a court of law, because society has very, very strong opinion about the role of law enforcement officers and relationship to the Black community. Is that going to be reflected in law enforcement and the trials? Because trials are based on a far different set of criteria than what is viewed as just by the people walking by, or the people who are holding a camera and filming the event. And I hope that justice will be served, because there's going to be protests if they view that this is just one more example of excusing white officers to murder Black people. And I know that there's a lot of discussion around it, but that needs to be completed in some ways outside of the military, because that's a law enforcement, and the proper role of law enforcement, I think, is in flux right now. But we still need to have the laws enforced and people following the rules, instead of lawless activity. Aha. And they're back to talk about the draft with some of the other things. My answer on the draft is very simple. I would like to feel that every person in society, and especially the ruling class, the sons of senators and congressmen and the daughters of senators and congressmen, they should be the first to volunteer for the military, because they should see at their level the responsibility that the military has with leading society, because these people have been given a lot of experience and a lot of responsibility in the past. We have fewer veterans in Congress and the Senate today than we've ever had. And if you look at neither candidate, either Trump or Biden, has a lot of military service. And but I would hope that anybody, before they send people in to go fight overseas would think of it as these are my children, my peers, I am willing to risk their lives because I feel it is so important to the vital interests of the United States that they are willing to accept the inevitable casualties that are going to happen. And for the people and my friends and family who have been sent overseas, I would expect that there's long and sleepless nights before they send us to go and fight. Another topic that needs to happen in the military that's also being addressed in society is sexual assault and sexual harassment. Right now, there is rampant in the military the amount of sexual harassment more than sexual assault because by definition, if you're assaulting somebody, you're harassing them as well. The roles of men and women in the workplace needs a societal change to accept everybody not as a sexual object, but to accept them as a coworker and to realize that there is no place in society for harassing people and certainly no place in society for sexual assault. There have been a number of very prominent cases in the military, specifically a young woman named Vanessa Guillen, who was murdered outside of Fort Hood, Texas. And I don't know what it is about Fort Hood, but that place has been a magnet for horrible, horrible things happening. And I hope that they are able to turn things around and find out where these people are getting the idea that sexual harassment and assault are not going to be caught and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But we have annual training, and in some cases it's every 6 months, that is specifically addressed to sexual harassment, sexual assault, prevention of those type of things. But I would enjoy seeing more than just having everybody gather into a gymnasium every 6 months and listening to a 3-hour lecture on this is why you don't want to sexually assault people. This is why you don't want to, that's, it needs to be lived. It needs to be something that you see as leadership from every level of the military. In the same way as if you work for a big corporation, it shouldn't just be from the office of President Davenport, we're going to have a sexual harassment training that happens once every 6 months. Okay, now we're done. The other 5 months and 30 days, just lead your life, harass, assault, whatever. We've done our duty. It has to be every professor. It has to be every GA, every student, every level of leadership on the campus. Sexual assault and harassment isn't going to disappear until, as a society, we decide enough. And once society accepts that this is who we are, then sexual assault is going to be greatly, greatly diminished. Because I think just like a lot of the other laws that we have, and it's really unthinkable for people to walk down the street and brag to their friends, yeah, I like to kick puppies. Yet there's a group of people who will talk about, yeah, I enjoy chasing after or doing things that aren't acceptable in society. We need to, as a society, make it so that it's not acceptable. And the military will reflect that because we get our 18, 19, 20-year-olds straight from society. And to society they shall return. And once society becomes better people, where it's unthinkable to harass, where it's unthinkable to assault people, then that will be reflected in the military. But what I like about the military is we can use us as guinea pigs. And we will say, okay, we are going to implement these very harsh and draconian rules that if we catch you saying stupid things and doing stupid things, you are going to be made an example of and drummed out of the military. And so that's a role that all of us need to participate in and work from. Okay, and so we've covered a lot of different topics, but as far as diversity goes, it's wonderful to think of how we reflect a diversity of America. Here, let me see if I can share. I have a screen. Nope, it's not working for me, but I'll just speak through it. But we used to be less than 1% of the military was female. Less than 1% of the military was gender integrated, racially integrated. And with the advent of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, If you are gay, you're allowed to serve in the military just like everybody else is. One topic that comes up is transgender rights, and I can see why, because if you are gay, you can just serve in the military from the first day. If you are transgender and require a reassignment surgery, that is by definition going to take you out of the ability to do your daily job. And so it needs to be discussed at what level of your journey as a transgender person are you allowed to serve in the military? Because if you require surgery and then you have uh, 8 weeks, 12 weeks of recuperation, that by definition is not going to work for the military. If you fall down and tear your ACL as a member of the military, you're once there, you're not an asset for the military. And if they know that you're going to have a series of surgeries over the next 3 years, then that by definition is incompatible with military service. If you have certain military or medical conditions that require continuous medical attention, you're not allowed to serve in the military. We allow people who are injured in the line of duty and, for example, have lost a limb, if they are in a military specialty that allows them to continue, they can continue. But if it's a like if you're a helicopter pilot and you lose a limb, you're no longer allowed to be in the military, and they'll medically retire you. And so as the surgeries and everything else for transgender evolve, then the case needs to be revisited. But it's incompatible with military service to say, okay, for the next 5 years, I'm going to be going through a series of medical treatments and medical surgeries. And that's the basis for the policy. But in my opinion, if you are eligible and physically ready to go and serve in the field, serve overseas, and be a functioning member of the military, welcome aboard. As long as you're following into the regulations and the rules as set by Congress for the military, and you're able to do your job, I say welcome. If you're not able to do the job on a timely fashion, then the military needs to have people who are ready to serve. Okay, and with that, anybody can chip in and ask questions, and I'll open up the floor.
Tim, I have a question that you haven't really addressed yet, is what about our veteran students or our current military students on campus? What are some of the challenges they are facing that we could be addressing?
Okay. The typical thing I hear from the military and veteran students is the common sense of alienation, that they feel like they're the other here on campus. And typically they are in their mid-20s as opposed to early 20s or teenagers. And they feel like they haven't found their real group. And so what we try and do here in the Veterans Center is build a sense of family and a sense of inclusion, and that, yes, you are valued by the faculty and the staff. And in some ways, a lot of teachers I know enjoy having veteran students in their class because they do provide a different viewpoint and a different level of experience of the typical student who comes to us from a Twin Cities suburb, is 19 years old, and has really never done anything outside of go to school for their adult life. And so if you have students who are veterans in your class, feel free to call on them. And a lot of people enjoy the fact of, okay, they're going to be able to, when we talk about, let's say something about overseas, they have been overseas. They've been to Asia, they've been to Europe, they've been to Africa. And so hopefully we have a much more reality-based view of the world, because the first time that you see real poverty, you realize that what we define as poverty here in the United States is wealth in other places of the country. For example, I was in a country called Djibouti, which is between Sudan, Ethiopia, and Yemen, is right across the water from it. The average annual income for a family is $120 to $140 per year. And so as a healthy American walking down the street, it's not that uncommon for us to spend $80, $100 on a good meal here in the United States for a family. That is the annual income for some of these families. The grinding poverty in some of these places is astonishing. If you were a family that just had a TV set and just had a car and just had indoor plumbing, you would be one of the wealthiest families in the entire village. And in the US, it just really helps me to keep a good perspective on how blessed and how fortunate we are to live in the United States. And as far as students go, it would be very nice for our students to realize just how fortunate they are to be given the luxury of spending 4 years of their life here focused on improving themselves as students, improving themselves as citizens, improving themselves as overall people. That is a very impressive thing the United States is able to offer to millions of young men and women per year. Well, I'm glad that, let me ask you, Pat, what is it about veteran students that you enjoy dealing with? Or was I accurate in my assessment of what it's like dealing with veteran students?
I think you're pretty accurate in your assessment. It's always interesting the difference between younger veterans who maybe have just done a 4-year or 8-year tour versus older veterans that have maybe made a career out of it. We definitely have some difference there, but I know that they also get a little frustrated because college life, university life is not as regimented as the military. Like you
Yes.
can't hold it as accountable, and I know there's a lot of frustration with that one for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that we get used to is there is a specific time we're supposed to get up and specific roles that we're supposed to play. And if you're in a leadership position, you're supposed to lead. If you're in a learning environment, I'm here to learn. And a lot of students allow the frustration of how come the professor isn't assigning more to us? I am here. I'm paying a lot of money to go to this school. I'm expecting more. And that just goes to the quality spread of instructors with a school. And this is the first semester that I have not had a legitimate complaint about a professor filed going up to the provost and them trying to fight against the system. I love that concept of demanding more. In some ways, what I like about the military students is they are sitting in the front row saying, okay, I am here. I've got a specific amount of time that I need to learn a lot of things. And I hope that they are challenging students who are demanding as much as they possibly can, because the students that always make me kind of sad are the ones who sit in the back of the classroom. They show up and they're barely paying attention to the lecture. This is one of the few times in your life that you are really allowed just to focus on improving yourself. Don't sell that short, or don't show up still hungover. Don't show up not ready to learn, because there's a tremendous amount of assets and time that's devoted to helping every student become the best student that they can be and the most productive member of society when they're done here and they've acquired the skills that will hopefully lead to employment excellence and personal excellence in what they're doing.
I think that's one of the reasons why I said that. I think that for peace officers to be or to have that military background or 2 years of conscripted service, one of the things that drives me nuts in this environment is that you have students who, they're maybe 18 and 19 years old, and maybe they come from a law enforcement family, or they've been Explorer Scouts, and then they come here, and then they're, reserves or CSOs, community service officers, and everything's been cop, 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 cop. And they don't have any experience in life. They don't have any experience outside of that controlled environment. They don't have any self-discipline. I mean, they're kids. And and they're going to be 20 years old in some cases if they've gotten, some advanced placement credits when they were in high school, 21 years old with a badge and a gun, and they're going to have to go out and try to relate to people much older than them with problems that they've never seen before in their life. And I can tell you, I was a police officer at 21 just for a short time before I went in. I was ROTC and then went on active duty. I was 26 years old when I became a Michigan State Police trooper. And in Michigan, the state police is a full service. So we're not just highway patrol. We go on calls and do investigations. So anyways, one of the first domestic violence cases I was on, I was 26 years old, and I'm counseling people in their 50s, a couple in their 50s. I said, look, you're as old as my parents. What am I going to teach you? You know, and at least I had that military background, whereas here, you know, the system in Minnesota and other places is set up, and it just ramrods these kids through, and they are kids. They literally are. They don't have any background, no life experience. People have this misinterpretation of the military that if you're a military veteran, you become a police officer, you're going to be this little robot walking around, and it's obviously not. You know, it teaches you respect, it teaches you discipline, it teaches you to see the bigger picture, and I think we're doing a disservice when it comes to you know, having peace officers that are literally, you know, fresh out of you know, what is essentially high school in these jobs. And when you look at the policing failures in Minnesota in the last few years, the killing of George Floyd, the killing of Philando Castile, I could go on, but when you look at those are basically reflective of a lack of discipline, a lack of training, a lack of you know, the personality necessary to do the job the appropriate way. And what people do then is they wrap it in a racialized blanket because they see light-skinned officer, dark-skinned victim, when the reality of it is, without knowing what is in the hearts and minds of people, it lacks, again, or reflects a lack of training, a lack of discipline, a lack of supervision that I think would be ameliorated if we had higher standards up to and including, you know, military service, or at least some sort of conscripted service. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
Well, no, wonderful rant. The military aspect is absolutely true. For most young people, the first time that they've really met people who don't look like them, sound like them, and think like them is the beginning of their military training. And it used to be a stereotype. You can look at like Saving Private Ryan. They've got a kid from Brooklyn. They've got somebody from the West Coast. They've got people from all different places, and it's an amazing aspect of it. Oh, here, let me take a pause for a second, and I'll be back. I'm back. Sorry about that. But yeah, what Carl was saying is absolutely right on the mark. The young men and women in the military, we send them out, but we have very close supervision on them. And by the time that you're really doing anything that requires significant judgment and such, you've got a couple years of experience. And in some ways, I would love to see police training augmented by a lot of the experience of just the common sense things that you learn in the service. Something that's very interesting here at the Veterans Center, we have started working with the social work department, and we've had social work interns for the 315 class come and spend time in the Veterans Center. And if you look at social work, they're dealing with domestic abuse, they're dealing with alcohol and chemical substance abuses, they're dealing with child protective type of services, they're dealing with vulnerable elderly, and they're dealing with a lot of veterans, because the veteran group has been trained how to be self-sufficient and be able to take care of ourselves. And so if there are going to be people living underneath a bridge, it can be a military veteran because they know how to stay alive in those type of situations. Whereas people who don't have those ability to live outside have to avail themselves of community resources to not be in a homeless situation. And it's ideal for me to have people who are going to go out and work for Blue Earth County or work for the school system or work for other things, to get them to be able to learn how to deal with the military cynicism and sense of humor, but also the familiarity that we have with dealing with good and bad things that life throws up at you. And I've thoroughly enjoyed having the social work interns come and spend time with us, because it really broadens their horizon, because most people have not dealt with people outside of their peer group. And the more experiences that people can get in law enforcement, the more experiences they can get in social work, the more experiences in mental health, the better they're going to be as a practitioner of their art. And so I would love to have just a broader sense of, it's not just military veterans who are here in the Veterans Center. If you're a law enforcement student, come and spend time. If you're a social work student, come and spend time. If you're a mental health, psychology, sociology, really any group can improve or find a valuable reason to come in here and get to know the broad diversity of the military students. Something that really surprised me is I thought when I was first hired that there would be about 95% white men in the Veterans Center. Instead, a third of our patrons are female. And we also have a very strong people of color. We are overrepresented by both Black and Hispanic groups in the military. And a lot of that is because if you're a young Black man who has a lot of ambition, joining the military is a good place for you to explore that. You're going to get out of your home environment. You're going to continue your education. You're going to get leadership experience. You're going to get money in your pocket, and you're going to get to see the big world beyond your hometown. And that is a very attractive thing to a lot of Black and Hispanic young people. And one of the nice things about the military is we do have a reputation of we hate everybody equally, like they say in the movie Full Metal Jacket. You come in here and we treat everybody poorly for the first 8 weeks of training, but then after that, you really do enter into an environment where you can become as good of a person as you want to become. The military will allow you to do things that you always thought were impossible. Well, and it's funny, the reasons I joined the military, I was born and raised in Mankato, and I wanted to get out of town when I was 18. I didn't want to see Mankato again. I wanted education. I wanted the opportunity to travel. I wanted to meet people from all over the world. I wanted to do new things and see interesting things. I just wanted to break out of the born, raised, lived an 8 to 5 existence and died in Mankato. I wanted to leave that behind. Yeah, here's a comment from Daphne. I was raised in California. Where do you think the Navy sent me with a home port change from Norfolk? I'm guessing they sent you back to North Island, Daphne. North Island, or was it back in the day of Alameda? Yep. And so it's funny how you can end up serving very, very close to where you were. But usually you will be sent to a lot of interesting and exciting places. And from Carl, do you hear much about professors not accommodating students' needs when they get orders for training to get deployed, et cetera? No, to be honest, the professors that I have met on campus, it is very, very rare that I even have to send them a letter. Usually I will go knock on their door and I will just answer any questions that they have about students' orders. And if there's a legitimate purpose and that they're doing things right, the professors will accommodate them and bend over backwards in most cases to be more accommodating in some ways than I would do if I was a professor. But it's very, very rare that we even have pushback for most of the students. And one of the things I warn my students about is don't play the veteran card if you don't have to. Get to know your professors. You are missing out on a substantial amount of education as a student if you don't go to office hours for every one of your professors and get to know them, because forming a personal relationship with your professors is absolute golden, and you should want to get to know your professors. That's why you're here. That's the benefit of in-person classes. It's nice to have Zoom and everything else, but I'm a fan of when safety and health allows it, getting back in the classroom. There's something to my experience of being in the classroom and interacting with people, being able to interact with your peers, forming study groups, making friends with your classes. You should never walk out of a class without striking up a conversation with a fellow student. You should never walk out of a class thinking, I don't really know what I need to do, and then just going back to your room and not discussing it. To me, education is a collaborative event. And if you're not participating with a group of people and the professor, you're missing out on half of your education. You can learn out of a textbook if that's what you choose to do, but you're making it much, much harder on yourself. All righty, folks. It looks like we're kind of coming to the end of things. And so I will cede the floor back to Megan. And thank you guys very, very much. I love talking about the diversity of the military, which to me is the diversity of society, and that the role that the military has is a good example for us to hold up and look at, and we can talk things about the way that society is through the military. And we need to integrate better in the military. We need to establish better training for everyone for prevention of sexual assault and harassment. We need to integrate moving around from place to place in society better. We need to innovate with accepting people from all over the nation, accepting people of different ethnic, different racial, different sexuality, different personal experiences. The better as a military we're able to do that, we are paving a path for society to do the same. And so when you see something in the military, don't say it's those bad service people. Think that's American society. We as an American society need to improve. So thank you very much for attending. And Megan, I will mute myself and
Thank you so much, Tim. We super appreciate all of your knowledge, and I think we had a really good discussion today. I appreciate everyone participating. I posted the sign-in sheet again in the chat in case you miss it and didn't fill it out, but I think I saw almost all of you fill it out, so thank you. Our next session is, oh, hold on. I wasn't quite ready there. Our next session is going to be November 4th, which is a Wednesday. And it'll be from noon until 1:30. The title of the next session is The Impact of Racial Perception and Appearance Stereotypes on Latinx in the United States. And so if you can join us for that, we would love to have you. All of that information is on our Facebook page or on the flyers that you might have seen. So please follow along. This video and recording will be available on our YouTube channel, the Diversity and Inclusion YouTube channel, after we get through and edit it. And then I will also be sending a follow-up email with a short survey and a link to all the other events as well. And yes, Destiny, you could definitely join the next session and leave early. And then if you want to watch that video later afterwards too, that is perfect. So yes. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. We appreciate your time and dedication to the Maverick Diversity Institute, and we will see you next time.